Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I'm ready to do my full review on the Vero Axon. And it's a bittersweet moment because when the full review comes on a knife, it means I stop having a justification to carry it as much because I'm always working on the next things that I'm reviewing. This will definitely still be sneaking into my pocket, probably a lot, because I have thoroughly enjoyed every single time that I've carried this knife. It is not perfect. It is not the end-all be-all of knives. I do have one small gripe with it overall, but this knife it's really, really, really good. So the Vero Axon is one of the newest models from Vero Engineering, and it is the most different, I would say, currently in his lineup from the others that are in the lineup, because it's not a flipper. All of his other knives are flippers, and this one is not. This one has holes on both sides, which is also a difference, and it's a front flipper. So inherently going to be quite different. Plus, all of his other knives at this point are drop points or tantos, and this one is, as you can see, what I would call a Warncliffe. I guess you might call it a sheep's foot, or maybe even a reverse tanto if you're feeling like that. I'm just going to refer to it as a Warncliffe because I think that works on this one. So I've had this knife now for probably 2 weeks at least, something like that. I've carried it at least 8 or 9 times for entire days, and it might even be more than that. Maybe I've had it a little longer. Anyway, I've carried it a lot. I've used it a lot. I've used it for everything from my typical like opening packages and mail to opening like packaging of toys for my daughter. I've actually opened quite a few. I had this during her birthday, and so over the few days that after she'd unwrapped all her toys, we were unboxing like the inner parts. This was on me for a lot of that. I've used it for a couple of zip ties. I've run it through a little bit of paracord just to feel how it did. It's flawless at it. Processed a lot of cardboard for the dumpster. I've cut, I think, 2 or 3 apples with it at this point, and I've been using it a lot, and I love it. I love using this knife, and so I've got a good amount of experiences with it to go ahead and, I think, speak from a place of confidence about it and how it performs. So let's start by going over the materials on this knife, and then we'll talk about carry, cutting, action, and ergos, all that kind of stuff. Probably not in the order that I just said the list, but we'll go over all of those things and talk some more about it. So first things first, we have a blade steel on this guy of Bowler M390. You'll see, actually, will you see, is M390 marked anywhere on here? I thought it was. I'm crazy. I don't see it. The things that are marked on here are the number of the knife. I got number 005, which is awesome. It's a really low number, so that's just exciting and cool in its own way. And then on the spine of the knife, you'll see the branding. Vero is laser etched there. So I really like that the blade otherwise is totally sterile, that it doesn't have the number and the steel and the brand name all marked on it. It's nice that it's on the spine and on this kind of under spot. Just looks better to me in that way. So M390 sterile blade. This one is finished in the belt satin. It was also available in hand rub. It was also available in DLC, stonewash DLC, and regular stonewash. So for this model, I pre-ordered this knife exactly how it is. I wanted the belt satin for the way that I envisioned using this knife, and I'm very, very happy with it. I now have an Impulse Mini in a hand satin. That looks gorgeous as well, but this I feel a little more comfortable using the way I intend to use this knife. So hand satin M390 blade. Scales on this guy are going to be natural micarta. It was also available in black micarta, red G10, copper, black end cut carbon fiber, and red end cut carbon fiber. And now there are some brass ones, which I'm not sure how, whether those will all be Lotto knives or what, but those are the handle materials that were available. I picked the natural micarta, and I'm glad that I did. Pocket clip on this guy is titanium. I believe all the hardware is titanium as well, although I'm not 100% positive on that. I think that's the case. And then this one is a liner lock. They are nested liners that have been internally milled for some weight reduction. I don't know if you can see in there very well, but I'll try. And it also has a lock insert. So on this titanium liner lock, there is a stainless steel hardened insert, which provides steel on steel lockup instead of steel on titanium lockup. That's my preference. I think that's great. And it's a ceramic detent, and it does have a little bit of a detent ramp, which is a great thing. I wish that was more normal for more knives. I think detent ramps are something that will hopefully become more and more common, but at this point they aren't super common, so that's great. Yeah, so those are our materials. I guess the only other thing I didn't mention is titanium backspacer. And it's a long, like kind of full backspacer, which I really like. I think it looks great, functions great, and yeah. So, materials I love. Let's start with ergos. I think I kind of usually start there, and I think that's a good jumping off point. Ergonomically, I really, really like the Axon. The way that this knife feels in my hand is excellent. There's really kind of two grips on most Vero knives, this one included. The primary one, I would call it primary, is right here. You put your two foremost fingers in this kind of double finger groove, and then the next two land on this flat. And for me, that is a very comfortable grip in hammer grip, saber grip, either one is really, really good. The other way is to choke up and use this flat for your pointer finger, then your next two fingers land in the groove and just your pinky goes on the flat. That is also super comfortable. This is the way that Joseph Vero, the designer of this knife, says he prefers to hold his knives. So I find myself kind of agreeing. I really like choking up on this knife, especially if I'm in a saber grip and I'm putting my thumb up here on the spine. I just get a tremendous amount of control and kind of comfort using this blade in this grip, but it's great back here as well. So I do use both. In addition to that, the knife is very comfortable in a reverse grip. I like that a lot. Got a nice spot to wrap my thumb around here. That's important to me. I like that. Reverse grip draw cut is fine. That really works quite well. It's a nice neutral handle, so if you need to make an occasional cut like that, it'll work. And then forward grip draw cut, very comfortable as well. So I like all of the grips. Feels good to me. Another thing, Vero pocket clips, if you've watched some of my previous full reviews on the Impulse or the Synapse, or if you've watched my previous videos just on this knife, Vero pocket clips, we'll talk about it more in depth, but ergonomically are not a strong suit for me. They tend to be a little hot spotty. This one happens to be the least hot spotty Vero clip that I've felt for my hands. I think people with different size hands, it may not bother at all. But for me, the way I land on this pocket clip, it's something that I've really gotten used to. The more that I've carried and used this knife, I've just grown to, like, it doesn't bother me one bit, but I do feel the pocket clip. In pretty much any grip that I use on this knife, I can feel that it's there. But it's less sharp for some reason than my experience with other ones has been. So yeah, that would be my only knock to ergos, and it's very small on ergos. We'll talk more about the pocket clip and carry, because that'll frankly be the big knock on this knife. In fact, let's just go there. I'm already talking about it. So I'll start with the bad on carry. Now, for some reason, I don't think everybody has this issue. Maybe they have a different tolerance for this than I do, but the tightness of this clip is borderline unacceptable to me. I love this knife in so many other ways, and in virtually every other way, frankly, that I find myself wanting to carry it and putting up with it anyways. But in and out of pocket, this clip is, it's difficult to get in and out of pocket. And the biggest reason for that I can think of is just that there is not enough space between the scale and the bottom side or the underside of that clip in there. It's just not a big enough gap. So even like today, I'm wearing jeans or pants that are on the thinner side of the pant thickness spectrum. And even with thinner level jeans, it's really, really tight to get this into pocket. And then getting it out of pocket, I'm like, I literally kind of have to yank it. And when I'm like fully aware that this is the knife that's in my pocket, and I know it's going to be like I have to wrestle with it a little bit to get it in or out, not a big deal. But in the moments where, because I switch knives daily, if not more, because I'm always reviewing stuff, in the moments where I've forgotten this happens to be the knife that's in my pocket, front right primary spot, and I've gone to pull it out, I've like actually kind of slipped off of it a few times. I don't like that. I wish that if I could wave a magic wand and make one edit to Vero knives in general, it would probably be the only one. Would be, I want a pocket clip with more space underneath it because it's very narrow under there, and I would also like for it to, instead of just coming up, kind of plateau a little bit on the lip, because since it just comes up, that's what kind of creates the hot spot. If it were to ramp up and then flatten a little bit and then maybe be a little bit rounded just so this edge wasn't so harsh, that would be amazing. So now that I've gotten all that off my chest, I've seen other people review this knife and say they haven't had the same issue. In fact, talking to friends who literally also have micarta ones, they say it's less of a problem on theirs. The Impulse Mini that I have right now, that I just unboxed yesterday, 2 days ago, I don't know, time is crazy. That one is even tighter than this. Spoiler alert, that's going to come up in that video. So I think it's just kind of the design of these, and a lot of people might just not care as much, or maybe they wear thinner pants in general than I do, but I find that hard to believe because some of the guys I'm talking to are like in Pennsylvania right now, and it's dead of winter, and I'm in LA, and like it's warm here, so I'm not like wearing super thick pants, you know? I don't know, not sure what it is, but it is, compared to every other knife that I regularly carry in my front right pocket as a primary knife, it is more difficult to get in and out of pocket than all the others. And the fact that it's not like an ultra comfortable clip in hand, it's harder to justify for me. I can't like, but it feels great in hand. So, you know, like I also would make an edit to how it feels in hand. So is what it is. That's the pocket clip. We'll let that be what it's going to be. In every other way, this knife, in my opinion, carries excellent. This knife is way lighter than I thought it was going to be before handling it. And it's just, yeah, the fact that it's titanium liners and they're milled out, the size of it, the dimensions, it all comes together to just be really balanced and feel really light. The micarta feels light and kind of airy, and it's comfortable in pocket in that way. It's also not overly thick. It's not a super thin knife either, but it's not crazy thick, and everything is rounded and fairly smooth, and this micarta feels like a natural kind of forgiving material. And so once this knife is in my pocket, it's a breeze to carry. Feels very, very good. I really quite like how light and kind of trim it feels in pocket. Also the fact that there's no flipper tab sticking out off the back like you get on so many other knives, and just all of the profile of it feels very good to me in pocket. So carry as a whole is like 50% perfect, 50% ruined by the pocket clip for me. But let's move on to action. So action on this guy is stupid fun. One thing that I am realizing now that I have the Impulse Mini here as well, and maybe when I've finished that full review, maybe I'll do a head-to-head between the two because they're kind of the same size, like shot for shot, almost identical in overall length and handle length and all that. So I'll probably compare the two, but the actual hole access on this one I find is a little bit better in terms of how much of the hole is exposed and maybe kind of how shallow the scale is next to it. It's just the easiest one I've found to get my middle finger into to deploy with the middle finger flick. So I love that about the Axon. In addition, this one has the slot on both sides, or the V-spot, I think is what it's technically been named by the Facebook group. So I can thumb flick it with the show side one. I can, as you've already seen, middle finger flick it, and then you can also, as it is designed to do, use the front flipper. I did that weirdly slow because I'm trying to hold it so weird. Let me not focus on focusing it and just do it. It's very easy to front flip for me. If you've never used a front flipper before, you might find it a little bit weird, but I've used a lot of front flippers, and as front flippers go, this one's great at front flipping. That said, 90+% of the time that I open this knife, it's with a middle finger flick. That's just the way I like to open my knives, and this one is a dream at middle finger flicking. I have seen some people mention that they think the detent is a little light on this knife. I kind of disagree. I think it's lighter than some other knives, but for each of the deployment methods that exist on this knife, the detent feels very well dialed for it. It can, if I really, really give it some oomph, it can be shaken out, but I haven't had any issues with it opening unintentionally or anything like that. And the fact that it spidey flicks so well, it's a win for me. So on top of that, this is still on the factory everything. I haven't done any KPL, no adjustment. Everything is as it came out of the box. I've just played with it a lot. It's a nice, smooth, silky action. It's not like stupid drop shutty, but with a little bit of a coaxing, it'll come right down. And yeah, I find myself playing with this knife a lot when it is the knife that I'm carrying, or if it's sitting next to me somewhere. It's one that I enjoy reaching for and fidgeting with. The action is great. And the lockup is great too. The fact that you've got that lock bar insert in there. Lockup is kind of on the early side, but not overly early. It's just a good solid lockup. I've had no issues with that. No lock stick. Nothing negative at all about the lockup or the action. So then the last kind of typical category for me to talk about is cutting performance. And as I already mentioned, I've done a lot of cutting with this knife, and it has been exceptional at just about everything that I've done. One thing that I love about kind of Wharncliffe style blades, and this is a perfect example of a blade shape that is why I love these types of blade shapes, it's just a nice, fairly straight edge all the way along, which makes it easy to track and easy to kind of predict as you're cutting with it. And then the fact that the tip is moved down here instead of on many knives where it would be like up here. That means when I'm cutting down into something, the only tilt I have to do is like this much tilt, right? And then I'm cutting through whatever is below the knife. On a knife with a tip up here, I have to tilt like this. Sorry. To get the tip into stuff. And so for literally opening packages, processing cardboard, all of the types of like incision cuts that I need to make a lot of the time, really mostly tape on a box, which is probably the most common thing for me to do with a knife. This just works so freaking good. It's a really great blade shape for it. On top of that, it's a really tall flat grind, and it's just a great thin behind the edge, wonderful flat grind cutting profile. It glides through material. The edge that's on it is excellent, and it has retained that edge perfectly. I've done no stropping, nothing. This is still the factory M390 edge, and it is going strong for me. It works great. I think the only kind of knock for blade shapes like this is sometimes I find it's better with certain tasks to have a really precise tip that I can kind of get into things. And in cases like that, like if I'm trying to get into a zip tie, that's a small zip tie around something really small, it can be kind of hard to get a tip like this into it. But even then, I've done a few zip ties and I was able to make do with this blade shape. So in terms of like an EDC knife blade shape, doing the types of EDC tasks that are normal for me to do, this is one of my favorite blades to use. Just all around great for it. And then I've also cut some apples with it, which I think is a really good indicator of like how slicey a knife actually is. Because if you're using a knife that has a good edge on it but doesn't have a slicey geometry, you'll find that the way an apple cuts is just like kind of brutal. But when you can get an apple to actually slice and look like a good normal apple slice, I consider that a good metric for a blade. And I've cut a couple of apples with this, and it's done excellent every single time. I get good slices that my daughter doesn't complain about, so that's all great. So cutting is phenomenal. Ergos are phenomenal. Action is phenomenal. And then carry is like a 50-50. And it's just that pocket clip thing, which I may sound like I'm being a little bit harsh about it, but I'm also raving about everything else about the knife, and Joseph is a friend at this point, so I want to be very clear that like I don't think this knife is perfect. I'm not just blanketly stating that there's nothing wrong with this knife because I consider the guy who designed it a friend, and because I like them and because I want more of them. Like, there's no ulterior motive here. I genuinely love this knife. I've genuinely really enjoyed cutting with it, playing with it, carrying it once it's in my pocket. And it's excellent in so many ways. I just, again, if I could wave my magic wand, there would be that one change I would make, which maybe eventually down the line there's a different clip option or it gets updated a little bit. I'd love to see that. I hope that's the case. But even if that doesn't happen, I still love this knife, and I still love just about every single one of his knives. I haven't tried every one of them yet, but all the ones I've handled I've ended up really, really liking. And even if the clips stay kind of a thing that for me isn't perfect, like, I can get over that because I love these knives so much. So I guess that's kind of going to be what it's going to be. One other thing I'll mention real quick, because I did talk about it, I think, in my unboxing, and I kind of addressed it in my first impressions. When I first got the knife, one of my small concerns was going to be that lock bar access would be kind of a bummer because the scale sits a little bit further out, or a little bit proud of how kind of the lock bar is set into the scale material a little bit. And so when you're pressing to disengage the lock bar, it almost feels like you're pressing against the scale as much as you're pressing against the lock bar. It's actually not a problem at all. Every time that I've carried this knife, used it, played with it, maybe I've gotten used to it. I don't know. I've just never had a problem disengaging the lock. It works every single time, and it's not uncomfortable. It doesn't hurt my thumb. Nothing is wrong with it. And I think ergonomically it's also kind of an advantage because the scale feels better to have this kind of meaty spot of my finger landing on than it would be to land on that metal lock bar. So it works. It's great. Not a concern. Just figured I'd throw that in as well. But anyway, again, this is bittersweet. I'm still going to carry it sometimes, but I won't have an excuse to keep putting it in pocket constantly, and that bums me out. I think that's also probably a pretty good indicator of how much I've enjoyed the Axon, and it's one of my favorite knives that I've experienced, period. It's truly great, just works great, feels great, and makes me happy. So I guess that'll be that. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it so much. I'll put links to all of Vero's stuff down below. As of when I'm filming this, I don't think there are any like big pre-orders about to happen or anything like that, but I get people who ask me all the time, how do I get one of those? And so the key is to be on the Facebook group, because you'll get news there, be on the newsletter, which you can sign up for on his site, and follow him on Instagram. And if you're in tune with what's happening across those platforms, then you'll see ahead of time when drops are coming. You can be ready, and you can get these things for not crazy aftermarket prices, because on secondary, these have been going for obscene amounts of money, like $500-600 for a knife that was less than half that new if you pre-ordered it. I don't like playing that game. I imagine a lot of other people don't. So follow them, be ready for when they drop, and then get one the cheaper way. Anyways, thanks guys. I appreciate you watching as always, and we'll see you on the next one.